When I married my husband, James, I knew I wasn't just marrying him. I was marrying into his family, the Sterling family. The name itself was spoken in our town with a mixture of reverence and fear. They were old money, or at least, that's what they wanted everyone to believe. They lived in a sprawling estate on the hill, threw lavish parties that made the social pages, and looked down their noses at anyone who didn't have a trust fund dating back a century. I, on the other hand, was a nobody. When I met James, I was working 2 jobs, one as a barista, another as a freelance graphic designer, just to pay my rent and put myself through night school. I drove a dented 10-year-old sedan and bought my clothes from thrift stores. To the Sterlings, I wasn't just a poor choice for their golden son. I was a stain on their pristine reputation, a gold digger who had somehow clawed her way into their world. From day one, James's mother, Eleanor, and his sister Victoria made it their mission to remind me of my place, which, in their eyes, was somewhere between the hired help and an unwanted houseguest. There was just one tiny, insignificant detail I never mentioned to them, a detail that would have changed everything. I wasn't poor, far from it. My thrift store clothes and beat-up car were a choice, a way to escape the shadow of my own family's name, a name that was worth 10 times what the Sterlings claimed to have. I wanted James to love me for me, not my inheritance, and he did. He was the only gentle soul in a den of vipers. But his family, they were about to get a reality check that would shake them to their very expensive core. The first few years of our marriage were a masterclass in passive-aggressive bullying. Eleanor, the matriarch, was an expert at the backhanded compliment. She would look at a new dress I'd bought and say, "Oh, Sarah, that color is so brave on you. It really highlights how sturdy you are. Perfect for someone used to manual labor." I suppose Victoria was less subtle. She was the kind of person who thought kindness was a sign of weakness. At family dinners, she'd accidentally leave me out of the conversation, turning her back to me to discuss exclusive vacations or high society gossip I couldn't possibly understand. She would coo, "It's a shame you can't join us in Aspen this year, Sarah, but I know how expensive the flights are, and James can't be expected to pay for everything. Maybe you can pick up some extra shifts at the coffee shop while we're gone." I'd just smile and nod. James would try to defend me, telling them I worked harder than anyone he knew, but his voice would get drowned out by Eleanor's dismissive wave. They treated me like their personal assistant whenever I visited the estate, asking me to fetch reading glasses or arrange hors d'oeuvres in the kitchen, because I was used to that sort of thing. I did it all without complaint, not because I was weak, but because I made a promise to James that I wouldn't let his family destroy our marriage. And secretly, a small part of me was waiting for the right moment to drop the facade. The turning point began with the Sterlings' annual charity gala. It was the event of the season, held in the grand ballroom of their estate. Everyone who was anyone would be there. A week before the gala, Eleanor summoned me to the estate. I found her in the solarium, surrounded by floral arrangements. She didn't even look up when she told me we needed to discuss my attire, because she couldn't have me showing up in one of my thrifty little numbers. She gestured to a garment bag containing a plain, beige dress. It was shapeless, dull, and designed to make the wearer invisible. A beige background for Victoria's shimmering spotlight. I thanked her, the words tasting like ash. The night of the gala, I wore the beige dress. As I walked down the grand staircase with James, I saw Victoria at the bottom, wearing a sparkling, emerald green designer gown that must have cost more than my car. She looked me up and down with a smirk and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Well, at least you won't clash with the drapes." "Good choice, Mother. She looks almost presentable." Eleanor just patted my arm and told me to remember my place, to stick to the periphery, and not to eat too many canapes because it was vulgar. I spent the evening hovering at the edges of the room, a beige ghost in a sea of jewels and tuxedos. At one point, I was standing near the buffet table when Victoria sashayed over, a glass of red wine in her hand. She pretended to stumble, and half the glass splashed onto the skirt of my beige dress. Her eyes went wide with fake innocence as she said, "Oops, how clumsy of me. Oh well, it's not like it was expensive. Maybe it will wash out with some soda water. The staff entrance to the kitchen is over there." The humiliation burned hotter than the wine on my skin. That was the final straw. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not a powerful socialite, but a sad, insecure bully. I told her calmly not to worry about it. that it was just a dress, and some things are more important than appearances. She scoffed and walked away, but I saw a flicker of confusion in her eyes. I hadn't cried. I hadn't run away. I had stood my ground. A few weeks after the gala, the atmosphere at the Sterling estate changed. The air, usually thick with arrogance, became heavy with tension. Then, the whispers started. Rumors flew that Sterling Enterprises, the family's investment firm, had made a series of catastrophic bets on overseas markets. There was talk of liquidity problems and creditors calling. I saw the signs myself. Fresh flowers replaced with silk ones. Staff reduced to a skeleton crew. One afternoon, I was in the library waiting for James when I heard raised voices from his father's study. Eleanor was screaming that they couldn't lose the house, that they would be the laughingstock of the entire state. James's father, Robert, sounded defeated. He explained that the banks weren't budging. They were leveraged to the hilt, and they needed $5 million just to stop the bleeding. Victoria was sobbing about her reputation and begging not to be poor. It was pathetic. The great Sterling dynasty was crumbling. 2 days later, James got the call for an emergency family meeting. When we arrived, the atmosphere was funereal. Eleanor was weeping, Victoria was pacing, and Robert sat with his head in his hands. Robert announced that it was over. The private equity group in New York had passed, and their debt was too toxic. Eleanor wailed that they would have to live like commoners, shooting a look of venom at me. Victoria demanded to know if James could take out a loan, and when he said no, she pointed a shaking finger at me. She screamed, "Well, what about her? She's used to being poor. She probably knows how to live on food stamps. Maybe she can give us some tips on how to be pathetic." The room fell silent. James stood up, red with anger, demanding an apology, but I put a hand on his arm to stop him. I stood up slowly. The beige dress was long gone. I was wearing a tailored black blazer. I looked at Victoria and said clearly, "Actually, Victoria, I might be able to help, but not with coupons." They all looked at me with confusion and disdain. Eleanor scoffed, asking if I was going to offer to clean the house. I ignored her, walked over to Robert's desk, and pulled a sleek leather folder from my bag. I asked Robert if he had heard of Aurora Holdings. He frowned and said yes. They were a massive investment firm out of Seattle. I slid a document towards him. I told him that Aurora Holdings had been quietly buying up Sterling Enterprises debt for the last 3 months, and that every time a creditor got nervous, Aurora was there to buy it. Robert read the document, his hands shaking. He looked up, bewildered, and asked how I knew this. I smiled a cold, tight smile and said, "Because, Robert, I am Aurora Holdings." The silence was absolute. Eleanor stopped crying. Victoria froze. James looked at me with his jaw on the floor. I told them my full name is Sarah Aurora Vance. I explained that my grandfather was a tech pioneer who built an empire, and when my parents passed, I inherited it all. Aurora Holdings is my family office. I watched the realization dawn on their faces. The horror that the barista they mocked could buy and sell their entire existence. Eleanor stammered, asking if I was rich. I told her yes, but unlike this family, I didn't feel the need to wear my bank account on my sleeve. I looked at my husband, whose shock was turning into profound respect. I turned back to his family and told them I didn't buy their debt to destroy them, but to protect James. I tapped the document on the desk and explained it was a restructuring agreement that gave them the money they needed. With generous terms. Robert looked like he was about to faint with relief, thanking me profusely, but I cut him off. "Don't thank me yet," I said. "There are conditions." I looked pointedly at Eleanor and Victoria. Condition number 1, the bullying ends today. I am James's wife, and I am the person holding the deed to your entire life. You will treat me with the respect I deserve. Eleanor nodded frantically. Condition number 2, Victoria will step down from the board of the charity gala, issue a public apology to the catering staff, and spend the next 6 months volunteering at a soup kitchen. You need a lesson in humility. Victoria looked sick, but she nodded. And finally, I said to Robert, I want a seat on the board of Sterling Enterprises. You need someone who understands how to manage money without letting their ego get in the way. Now, you answer to me. I left the document on the desk and walked out, James by my side. He squeezed my hand and whispered that he had never been more proud. The Sterling family kept their estate, but everything else changed. The parties stopped. The arrogance vanished. Eleanor and Victoria became the most attentive, polite in-laws anyone could ask for. It's amazing what the threat of financial ruin can do for someone's manners. They never truly liked me, of course. Now, instead of disdain, their eyes hold fear, and that suits me just fine. They wanted a reality check. I gave them an unmasked reality. And I think, deep down, they know they got off easy, because I didn't just save their home. I saved them from themselves.